Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening or morning, depending on wherever you're dialing in from. We'll just take a few minutes more while we wait for people to join us. My name is Tess. I'm delighted to be hosting this session on behalf of Gajah Gallery. This is actually the first webinar we've organized, so if there are any technical issues later on, just please be patient with us. While we're waiting for people to join, I'd just like to give you an overview of our program today. I'll briefly introduce Ashley and Gregory, then we'll let the two continue in dialogue on the exhibition and the ideas behind Ashley's work, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session for the audience to direct questions to both. This will not be so much of an art history lesson as it is an examination of the works in the current show and the ideas that have driven Ashley over the last few decades, providing insight into one of probably the most fiercely articulate artists our gallery has the pleasure of working with. It will be quite informal, so feel free to get up, stretch, have a drink while you're listening, and whenever you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box below. Just a bit of background about the gallery. Since 1996, Gajah Gallery has been a pioneering body in the Southeast Asian art scene, representing a portfolio of the region's leading artists, as well as engaging the brightest emerging talents in contemporary art today. In 2012, we opened Jogja Art Lab in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, as an experimental production platform for artists to come together and produce works across various mediums. Yao has now worked with Ashley Bickerton, Unazar, Suzanne Victor, Uji Hahan Handoko, Handi Wirman Saputra, Kaylee Go, Kumar Nahapa, Jason Lim, and many more. This year, Gajah Gallery celebrates our 25th anniversary with an exciting lineup of exhibitions, starting with Ashley Bickerton's solo, Heresy or Codswallop. Heresy or Codswallop is Ashley's second solo exhibition in Singapore and will be showing in Singapore until the 14th of February. His first solo in Asia was Junk Anthropologies in 2013, where he introduced the regional art scene to his Silver Ladies series. This exhibition now brings together 6 of Bickerton's series, the Wall to Wall, Coral, Mitochondrial Eve, Blue Man, Silver Ladies, and Flotsam paintings, in addition to 3 sculptures. As Ashley himself has said before, if one were to gather all of his work over the years in one space, it would look like a group show, precisely because he reinvents his own visual language in each series, constantly finding new direction in every iteration. At a time when the worldwide pandemic has limited access to physical space and international travel and impacted the processes many artists depend on, Bickerton has managed to adapt and thrive, presenting both new works and iconic pieces from the last decade of his practice. We are also honored to have Gregory Galligan join us today. He's the catalog writer for the exhibition and an art historian, independent curator, director, and co-founder of Thai Art Archives, which is Thailand's only independent nonprofit platform for the recovery, study, preservation, and exhibition of Thai modern and contemporary art and ephemera. Formerly based in New York and now based in Bangkok since 2010, Gregory is a frequent contributor to Art in America and a contributing editor to Art Asia Pacific magazines. Thank you all so much for being here today. With that, I would like to invite Ashley and Gregory to turn on their cameras and we'll let them take it away.
Hi, Ashley, hi. Great to see you.
Great to see you. Great to see everybody. How are you?
We have Bangkok, Bali, and Singapore online here all at the same time today. That to me is still amazing, even in this day of technology. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Okay. Well, it's great to be here. I want to thank Jadeep, the director of Gajah Gallery, his wonderful team, Therese, who just spoke, amongst others, Joseph and others, as well as you, Ashley, because this has been for me a very exciting project over the last few months. Sitting in lockdown during COVID, I think a lot of us have been looking back at the past. I have a lot of friends posting photographs and things from the past on Facebook or Instagram. And for me, this was quite a trip to the past in some ways too, because in catching up with you, I had to go all the way back to the 80s. And both of us were starting our careers in New York in the mid 80s. And you became a famous artist. I became an obscure art critic. But other than that, we were similar, probably crossing the same streets, West Broadway and others at that time, and not knowing each other at the time. So it's been quite a pleasurable look back for me, and a way for me to begin to think about some of the issues from that era that have survived and evolved in your work over the years. I think you've gone through many transformations, but there are some amazingly consistent threads in your work that go all the way back to your origins, and I think that that's not only fascinating but something to be admired. I think that you're very consistent in those ways, and at the same time, people have seen quite a wide range of experiment in the way that you've worked over the last 3 decades. So this is your second solo with Gajah, and in 2014 you did a show called Junk Anthropologies, and I did not see that show, but the catalog looks amazing, and I wondered if you could help us understand how you see the current show in relation not only to that one, but maybe in the recent trajectory of your work and what you're doing now. How do you see Heresy or Codswallop, which is named after one of the paintings in the current show? How do you see that now as an artwork in itself, as an exhibition in itself? How does that fit into your?
I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here and say what you address what you said earlier, which was that the overarching thread that runs through the work.
Yeah.
I only have one favorite type of critic. The rest are all essentially wrong, and those are the ones that are able to see the work as a constant, no matter the stylistic infidelity that I've indulged in over the course of the years.
Right.
And the fact that sometimes a body of my work from 2-3 different decades looks like a group show.
Right.
Those who are looking closely enough actually see the threads that run through it all and realize that actually it's not dissimilar at all. Even though you might have hyperrealism over here, sort of a pandering sort of self-conscious ironic exoticism over there, a hard-ass cultural critique over here.
Right.
Actually, there is a certain voice that runs through it all. I suffer from something rather odd in my overall, now over 30-year career, which is that I have people who followed my work in the 80s, who liked what I did, and they sort of come along and see what I've done since I moved to Bali, say when did I move to Bali? 1993.
93, right.
They get lost. They think I got soft. They think I, indulged in chroma to some libidinal and excessive degree. They
the new Gauguin.
They think I lost the plot. And then conversely, I have people who know the work more recently who discover the earlier work that I did in New York and just go, oh, boring.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Yeah.
And so there are two sort of groups, and they meet in some people, and you're one of them, Gregory. So I'm deeply appreciative there. You understand. You're looking deeper than the skin, because I always say that work is not defined by the surface, by the skin, by the look.
Right.
The look is only just that. It's the engine. One has to look at the engine, and the engine is everything.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, conceptually, I see a lot of continuity. Roberta Smith saw it in the 90s, and others more recently have begun to see the continuity. And what's so interesting is that conceptually, there's a lot of continuity. Formally or materially or stylistically, you are very experimental. But I think one of the joys of watching what you've done over the years is seeing this consistency. No matter what the style is, the ideas are very, they really last and they really travel well. And that's interesting because we often think of the 80s as, ancient history in many ways. And yet it's some of its major themes, and we'll talk a bit about that if you would in a bit, but some of those major themes really do persist in your work. And I think that has been so exciting for me to see. I'm glad we're here with Codswallop and Doggerel, the painting, because I wanted to start there. If I can, let me quote you from 1987. That is over, what's about 34 years ago. It's, what we call as historians a generation ago. Not to date us, we're the exact same age. Anyway, you said in 87, and I wonder how this resonates with you today. I put it in the catalog and I haven't even asked you how it resonates now. You said, I want to create objects that are shamelessly beautiful at the same time that they invest in the utter bankruptcy of all possibility. But then again, I think that this is a possibility that creates its own poetic dynamic, that is capable of producing its own optimism.
Wow.
You're still producing optimism?
That is very funny, because I have no recollection of that quote whatsoever. As Elton John claims not to know his early lyrics anymore.
You're right. This is in the Saatchi catalog called New York Art Now.
Yeah.
And Dan Cameron pieced together. Yeah.
I believe that was 88 or something. I can't remember.
Right around then, 87, 88. Yeah.
89, yeah.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed one iota.
Yeah, I don't think it has.
Not one iota. You can see, something that looks like a sort of like, Fogoganian exotica of, nymphets and expiring expatriate lounge lizards.
Right.
Lurching through whatever their belief system is. And it's actually the same as a bunch of logos.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that looking at Codswallop and Doggerel, for instance, this wonderful piece, and I know this is one of your favorites. We've talked about this a bit behind the scenes. I would look at that as an art historian. The first thing I do is I call that a portrait painting. But you don't. Very interestingly, I've heard you call a painting like this a head painting or a painting-like thing. Yeah. And I think that that's really key for people to grasp. I think almost no matter what they're looking at that you've produced, in a sense, how much do they take it for an image and how much do they take it for almost an anti-image?
I'm not making a painting. I'm making an approximation of a thing that is a painting.
Yeah, I love that distancing. Yeah.
I also deal with landscape, and I keep going back. I don't make landscape. It's not a mirror of the world. It's not an image of things and places that exist. It's a psychic trigger for the experience of being there.
Right.
In that landscape. And the same I would say probably with the figures. It's the figure itself. I'll dive right in and go right to Blue Man. It's not about him. It's not,
we can. I wanted to bring up Blue Man next. We can go back and forth.
It's not about the Blue Man. I'm doing paintings of paintings in a sense. I am from a postmodern generation. There is those sort of distancing devices. There is that sort of God, I hate irony. And we need to kill Warhol. But all things in due time, one step at a time. We can't kill him outright, but we'll have to do it piecemeal, one step at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, irony must die, and Warholianism as a central anchor to all art thinking really has to be gotten past.
But it doesn't mean that we need to drop the critical distancing that you engage in, which I like. I mean, the questioning of meaning in an image, or the production of a painting that questions, in a sense, its own ability to contain meaning or to convey meaning. When you talk about bankruptcy, the bankruptcy of all possibility, not to hold you to words of 30 years ago, but in a sense, this was key to the neo-conceptual era of the 80s, the idea of critical distance in what we called then the opacity of images, that they weren't transparent to translation.
Okay, yeah. Well, we get to a central dilemma there. I'm sort of caught in a two currents moving in separate directions there. I don't know. Let me leap to the safety of an analogy here.
Yeah.
We're talking about living in Bali here, and I was talking about being an expatriate, wanting to just shut the doors to paradise, knock everything out, go back to the 30s, and somebody was saying, "Well, that's impractical." And my response was, "Why do I need to be practical? I'm an artist.
Right.
I'm not a scientist. I believe in following the contours of empirical reality as closely as I can in general, but my stock in trade is something else entirely.
Yeah.
I don't need to, follow the logic of civic planners. I market in dreams.
Sure. And chance, dreams happening upon things obliquely sometimes, I think, in ways that cannot be translated necessarily in terms of discourse.
Psychic states.
Yeah, sure.
Uh-huh.
To go back a bit to the Codswallop and Doggerel, Tess, if you can take us back to that image. I wanted to ask you to help your audience understand the method and process behind a production, because I did see a video and I was amazed at what goes into this. And this speaks, I think, to the fact that you see them as objects.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So there's so much going on in this particular one. It's hard to begin, but I've said this quite a few times in a number of interviews, but I don't feel comfortable in painting, sculpture, or photography.
Right.
And this is a classic example of my working through that, finding that perfect overlap, that perfect admixing, and that perfect point in the middle where I'm doing none of them and all of them all at once. I get to build this very, and one more thing. There was an argument I had with an old assistant of mine, Mark Guyon, who went on to become a well-known artist in his own right. And we both argue about who had this quote first. One must move one's artwork as close to one's lifestyle choices as possible, and not vice versa. One of the meanings of that is that one should make the work fit with your biology. The way your body, your psychology, your daily being in the world responds, and let the actions of building that piece respond to that. Don't fight the piece and don't fight yourself. And so I did these hyper-realist paintings for a while before it drove me absolutely nuts, spending 16 hours a day, handwriting the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah, with a ballpoint pen that did not write properly, while you're hunched over in this horrible, back-breaking sort of position. And that was you ask yourself, why am I doing this? This is stupid. And so these were an effort to change the whole process of making the art. So I would always be engaged and entertained. So I could slop some clay together, boom, 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 wear dirty clothes, be expressionistic, be a bit wild.
Yeah.
I also had a whole collection that we made much more carefully with a team of noses, eyeballs, tongues, mouths, teeth, ears, etc.
Yeah, I noticed.
And we've done them in millions of positions from photographs. And so it'd be like Mr. Potato Head, and I just stick him into clay. So that whole process just took a day. And then I slop paint on it. So I got to wear dirty clothes.
Yeah.
And then I changed my clothes, my clean clothes, and photographed them. And that became another thing, lighting, photography, blah, blah, blah. And then we go and become another kind of tech head and sit behind the computer. And and I shot them from many different angles. So it was also another sort of form of cubism. So stitch it all together in Photoshop. Again, wearing clean clothes, sitting at a computer, and then we print it out on a canvas, and start painting again.
Right.
There were so many sort of processes, so no one process was too long anymore.
Right.
It's what I call downhill painting as opposed to uphill painting. Uphill painting, you're looking at the white canvas, and then you've got to make something happen on it.
Right.
Whereas downhill painting, sort of everything is sort of already there, and it's like skateboarding downhill, skiing downhill. It's not about you don't have to slog upwards. So so this painting represents a perfect sort of admixture of that, putting it all together. I hope I didn't get too arcane there.
No, not at all. I think in a way you're pointing out that each of these media, these different media that you're using, what's beautiful is that they remain in the finished piece. They kind of inform each other. From a distance, you can almost think it's sculptural coming off the surface of the canvas. Up close, you see that it
is based on a photograph of sculpture.
Right. So, and they are, all of those elements tend to be retained in the final image itself. And at the same time, you've got these triggers that evoke a sense of sensuality, the sexuality, a kind of attraction and repulsion to the image. And I think that's amazing. The abstraction behind a figure in this case.
Yeah, I think with this particular image, I kind of got where I want to be. One of the worst things an artist can be for me is somebody who illustrates their sexual desire. This has utterly no interest for me. It's always a play. It's always sort of, there's always a play going on. And so this particular image, the hand is sort of blocking you. The tongue is undefined if it's a come on.
Right.
But you know, there's sort of this, I never want anything to sit. I never want any meaning to be locatable.
Right. It's always moving.
I never want you to get home
right.
with, you know, with your understanding of something. I want to leave things in this kind of ethereal space. And there's a reason for that. It's like when you hear this gorgeous song in a foreign language and it's just so wonderful and evocative and it transports you and moves you, lifts your heart and you soar. And then finally you're so interested in the song, you go and look up the translation, what it means, and you go, oh,
right.
Wah, wah, wah. And it's, the magic is gone. So I like that suspension.
Not knowing, sure.
Not knowing, yeah.
Right. In the morphing, the image morphing, sculpture, painting, photography, a kind of doll making almost with these parts. And I also found the hand, which I remember when I saw this image for the first time, I didn't even notice this hand. And once I do, it's a kind of interruption or a blocking or this use of the blur so it's moving and morphing. And I think that's really very special about these images. Yeah, go ahead.
There is a long history in the work of actually, you know, acknowledging the viewer in real time. If painting can have a real time, like film or video or documentary, or
right, if it seems to be happening in front of you.
Yeah, as the view, that I'm actually, you know, setting an interaction with the viewer on purpose. Like, you know, this is as far as you go.
Right. Well, this reminds me.
And the makeup always runs between clownish, but also a parody, if you want, of actual makeup, like eyeshadow, lip ding, and then the yellow of the nose is a bit clownish. Right. So never quite wanted to land.
Right.
People have said to me they're scary, and I'm like,
they can be.
I
think in the way that a scary doll can be scary. I mean,
to me they're cute.
Yeah.
I don't see them as scary in any way.
I can see the whole range. I can. If we look at apex species, one that's very close in the catalog, two pages away. Thank you, Tess. The density, and I find this one a little scary, and you may find it utterly charming, utterly cute. But the teeth, the grip, the grin, the density of the materials, this kind of congestion, and yet this florid, you know, ebullience about the whole thing. So I could see either. It's almost a whole range of reactions that you're accommodating when you think about it. Motivated perception. We can walk up to it and see what we want in this work.
Yeah, this is my apex species. Yeah, this is definitely from the Mitochondrial Eve series. So yeah, she's apex.
Tell us what this means, because I don't know what this means exactly to you. Apex species, apex moment.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the theories of the mitochondrial Eve, but back between 90 and 150,000 years ago in East Africa, we can trace our matrilineal DNA to one single individual.
Oh yes, of course.
With the mother of every single human being alive.
Didn't know what it was called.
extant,
Right,
extant being, extant Homo sapiens who's ever lived.
Yep. Supposedly
so-
we're all related.
So I've taken extraordinary license here, of course, but I just love the idea of how do I best describe this? Okay, yesterday, every day, I was meditating to Krishna Das singing Hare Krishna. And then I'm not the least bit religious or spiritual in that particular regard. And then I go and read science books while I'm on the treadmill and exercise, and I get lost in the minutiae of, like, protons and atomic particles, and the fact that we can fit 500,000 protons on the dot of an I in any book you've ever read. And then we can divide that again by 1,000,000 parts and pour a tablespoon of matter into that. And in a time it takes to make a sandwich, we'll create a new universe. This stuff is
Right.
sort of religious epiphany stuff.
Well, very cosmic, right? Yes, it's spiritual more than maybe religious, right? Right.
So this stuff sort of borders in this kind of area for me. This mitochondrial Eve becomes like,
Yeah.
this Madonna figure. But I don't know, how do you say you're deeply spiritual, but in this world that is purely scientific?
Sure. Well, at one time it might have been called pantheism, a sense of spiritual in nature and the cosmos, and deriving your sense of spirituality out of that, rather than out of an organized religion per se. Yeah, some kind of institutionalized or organized religion. I mean, I consider myself very spiritual, but it's in a very kind of pantheistic way and cosmic way that you're speaking of.
Yeah.
Even science can be considered quite spiritual. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm finding.
Right.
My latest habit is science books when I'm on the treadmill, and I find it like deeply as moving as probably anything I've ever found. It's very odd, but just being on the treadmill.
Yeah. Well, the motion,
I don't even run, I walk.
the repetition, the rhythm. I mean, that is in a sense very cosmic in itself. I mean, it can evoke that certainly if you.
It actually took me by surprise, and I think there's something there. And I had a conversation actually earlier today at the affair that I'm attending, and in regard to that, with a fellow who's both a yoga teacher and a medical doctor. And I said, there's something here that needs to be opened up. While conspiracies and magical thinking, tend to, are exploding in all sorts of quadrants across the world, I think there's also something else taking root, which I'm trying to address here, which is that actually we can be listening to Krishna Das singing Hare Krishna, and then go into, protons and subatomic particles and the grand mystery of existence.
Yeah.
But yeah, the edges of the known cosmos.
It's interesting you say that, because back in the late 70s, there was a lot of interest in the United States. Of course, some people could consider this rather Orientalist, but there was a tremendous amount of interest in Zen, and Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a paperback we all picked up in the late 70s, and before we went on to Baudrillard's and the Simulacra. So, but there was this whole moment of Zen in this mix of science and more of a Zen-like way of seeing things. I mean, there is an absolutely beautiful way that those things interlock and can be expressed in the most mundane, material aspects of our daily life. You can, it's one of the principles of Zen. You can meditate on sweeping, a patio. You're not supposed to always be looking for these sublime experiences in the world. It can be very material. You can be on the bike, as you say, and be having that experience. So how do some of these head paintings are going to strike people as being very exotic and almost Orientalist, and you've had that critique before, and
not so much with the heads, more so with the blue man.
Yeah, with the blue man. I want to move on back to the blue man, and you've also spoken of him as, earlier in your life, you've spoken of him as perhaps partly autobiographical.
Oh no.
I heard you.
Let's cut that right there.
Yeah.
Are there aspects that reflect aspects of myself? Yes, I'm able to use him to laugh at myself. Absolutely. Yeah, because he represents a certain aspect of expatria, a certain aspect of the, shall I get political for a second? The cis white male against the backdrop of the eternal East, etc. So
Absolutely.
yes, and I am part of that. So am I able to use him to laugh at myself? Is he autobiographical? Yes, I certainly borrow things from myself, but no, he actually comes out of, okay, let's get simple here for a second. When I moved to an island years ago, almost 3 decades ago, when I moved to Bali,
Yep.
the cliche sort of take that was sort of so mundane and predictable became, Gauguin, the references.
Of course.
And it became sort of boring and silly, but I always take these things as a challenge. And I said, okay, so Gauguin. I like Gauguin, but I hadn't really been thinking about Gauguin. I certainly wasn't doing that when I moved here, or trying to do that. But you want Gauguin? Let's give you Gauguin. So I constructed a theater of Gauguin.
Right.
A sort of a grand kabuki opera, of Gauguin and sort of exoticism. And I needed a Gauguin type character. So I borrowed a fellow that I'd used in a film while I was still an art student, way back in 79, 80. Maybe?
That's right. Right.
And this is when the original character developed. He didn't have the hairdo yet.
Right.
He was actually the artist Larry Johnson, the Los Angeles artist, played the role of the original Blue Man. Hold on, turn this noise down. And so he basically was a stand-in for Gauguin, and also every sort of post-Joseph Conrad protagonist figure through, the sort of existential anti-heroes of, that populated the literature and thinking of the 20th century.
Yep.
So he becomes sort of a character of this, but now we're in a different world. This is not the Pacific of Gauguin. This is sort of boom 20th century Asia. It's different. So a lot of those ideas, when applied to the context, don't quite fit. The ideas of his own sexuality, the sexuality of his potential partners, doesn't quite fit. So there's always, it's those edges that interest me, the ones that don't quite fit, the square peg trying to fit into a round hole. So essentially this Blue character is, trying to live out these tropes, these sort of these ideas of himself, but he doesn't quite fit, and purposefully I populate them with nymphets because classical painting had nymphets, and so it's not so much it's about him or the girls or the thing or what they represent. They just become types that operate, that sit in the painting because it's a painting, and that's what paintings have. And so I'm paradising a painting. It's a sort of weird line to take now. With the political landscape is quite
charged,
say, defined and very specific. And so there's certain lines that are able to be drawn, and I take pride in being able to tread dangerously, but delicately.
Or two.
Now, somebody maybe in the question and answer session afterwards will take exception with that, and I welcome the question because I'm always willing to be corrected. But that's kind of the game I like to play here.
Yeah, well, I think once again they accommodate different readings all at the same time, and the thing that I notice is that in interacting with them like that, you're very much left on the fence. You don't know where to settle. And I think that that's one of their great strengths. The thing I wanted to ask you about, which I've noticed with a lot of these, is this, there's a recurring theme in your work about excess or gluttony or obesity or consumerism, like carried to an extreme. These works tend to remind me of that kind of excessive carrying something to an extreme, almost a kind of gluttony of sorts, or an insatiable hunger. This is a very good example, the Fat Man, which goes, your sculpture that goes all the way back to your original Fat Man of about 1993 or 4 when you first arrived in Bali, right?
Yeah.
So there's another thread that goes picking up again. Yeah. I mean, the original Fat Man didn't refer to, well, I don't know if it referred to excess. It was reflective of your feelings of arrival in Bali and coming from New York.
Yeah.
You can tell it better than I. I mean, this is what how does Fat Man today, 2019, relate to your original in that sense?
The premise was set up then, and now I'm just exploring variations of it. It's like a scientist setting up a sort of a theoretical platform to investigate a certain area, and now I'm just getting into the granularity of it all.
Is it in a sense a work on a work? It's a work in a sense based on a work, so it's a distancing from the original, but it's maybe taken on a more analytical.
Well, I'd like to get back to what you said about gluttony and excess.
Yeah.
This is sort of, I've never really thought about it. It's nice you articulate it so precisely, because, I've sort of wandered and blundered through this territory my entire life and never really articulated it like that. But actually, you got something there. The excess of the fat body is also the excess of the pieces I did in the 80s, which were like really overdone.
Yeah.
Armatures, handles, colors, materials, also the information overload. I mean, I just sort of keyed them up to 11, then put my foot on the accelerator and then pump some more stuff into them.
Right.
I am not a minimalist.
Right.
And, there's always a sort of rebounding between, like excess, which reflects things in my own life. You get like that diet, and then you clean up, and then you zen out and go on some kind of juice cleanse.
Yeah.
And there's always that rebounding between extremes, but the excess is sort of, it's definitely part of it.
Well, it's a recurring. I notice it is a recurring theme: the fat body, the blue man who ends up being quite obese, and this is what made me think of Peter Greenaway's.
I would like nothing more than to do sort of elegant, grayish, sort of minimal things with sort of cool mediated distance. I could name a few artists, but I won't.
Right.
Who are eminently respectful, but I can't help. I'm attracted to the sewers, the intellectual sewers. I'm attracted to the sort of slums and the colors and the fights, the street.
Right. Sure. The circuit of stimulation in a way of all the senses, so to speak. Yeah. This show, the current show, also features a wonderful selection of some sculptures, where we see it with the Fat Man, and also wall reliefs like Wall. Can you tell us a little bit about Wall? Because these, for many people, originally myself included, were the hardest ones to wrap my head around. And you can tell us about the origin, which I found interesting, in the walls. And then maybe we can talk a bit about the way they function.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But
I remember Mexico.
But maybe not. Hold on. Okay. I've said this quite a few times in quite a few interviews, but hopefully it bears saying again. I was sitting on a bus coming from Puerto Escondido in South Mexico toward Acapulco, lost in some kind of reverie of some sort.
This is in the 80s or when is this?
Yeah, 80s, but actually early 80s.
Early 80s.
The first incarnation of this work was 85.
No, you're right. Yeah, this was prior to the Susie box that we're looking at. The wall actually.
They were all Susie boxes, but prior to that one, that's that logo piece. Yeah.
Well, actually, also people should know that your wall piece was one of the first pieces you had in the historic show at Sonnabend in 1986. That defined the whole Neo Geo kind of debut.
It actually goes back further to the Cable Gallery.
Oh, okay. Yes.
The storied gallery on the corner of Broadway and Houston in Lower Manhattan, just north of Soho.
Right.
And It was a gallery that first showed, oh my God, Chris Wool, James Norris, Heim Steinbach, Clegg Gutman, like a whole roster of artists had their first show at that gallery. And more interestingly, it was also the offices of Def Jam Records. So into and out of that building all the time, you'd see like Run DMC
Wow.
coming in and out, Russell Simmons, and then on occasion the Beastie Boys. So it was just one little tiny cultural moment that sort of represented so much.
On the corner of Houston and Broadway.
Yes, so that's when I first showed these pieces. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I was sitting in a bus and I looked, and suddenly I looked up and I realized I was staring at something that caught my interest, and I wasn't sure what it was I was looking at. And then suddenly, it was clear as day. I was looking at this hideous Mexican garden wall. I think it was pink and purple. And like the bricks were painted one color, the spaces in between another.
Right.
And then I realized, like, that's it. That's what I want to say. That's what I've been looking for. Because what is a painting? A painting is a piece of colored wall that sits on a wall and changes that wall and affects meaning.
Right.
And somehow is transformative in some way, but nevertheless, it's a wall filler. So what's more obvious than a piece of colored wall, especially a bombastic piece of colored wall that asserts itself in some possibly idiotic way. So I just did these snap-on pieces of wall. That's what they are. That's what they are. They fill your wall.
Yeah.
And so basically it's a paint, without being minimalist, it's a painting at ground zero.
Sure. It's like the reduction right down to a kind of.
Yeah, except it's not reductive. That kind of what I was trying to get at here. It's like the object itself is not minimal or reductive, but the idea is as reductive as you can get.
Or in some ways, it's even redundant. It's the wall on the wall, and it's reinforcing that sense of the both the desire, I think, to interact with a painting, and then what you've called sometimes the bankruptcy of that tradition, where representation can, in a sense, be so opaque that it cannot deliver meaning. I mean, part of your moment in the mid 80s when you created these was the whole neo-conceptualist moment was supposedly a kind of rejection of neo-expressionism and a rejection of the myth making in that kind of painting and the.
Hold up.
Yeah.
1 second. No, good point.
I mean, that's the narrative that we read.
Rejection of neo-expressionism.
Yeah.
But maybe a jealousy of their ability to speak.
Maybe, sure.
Whereas pure conceptualism had been so self-referential, so self-absorbed, so self-indulged that it only addressed its own mechanics.
Right.
Whereas other things were able to talk about, like my screwed up relationship, that I love my dog, this is what I dream of, and so maybe there was something else now. I'm saying this
I think that's
just crossed my mind. Yeah.
That's interesting because I think that David Saleh talks about that to some extent. You also come out through CalArts and your training and your background emerging from CalArts in the early 80s. You come out of what we now look at as what's called in the 70s, the pictures generation.
Or later the CalArts Mafia.
Right, the CalArts Mafia and Jack Gold.
I'll say it here and now, though. Whatever David Saleh said, I categorically disagree with on principle.
Okay.
A priori of whatever the hell it means.
Yeah. Well, I know that he's been highly criticized for some of his discourse, which his way of explaining some of his paintings and the way they're supposed to function. But what I think is so interesting is his discussion of imagery as being so opaque that it represents both what you're calling a kind of poetry, but at the same time, a kind of bankruptcy.
He's an enormously intelligent man and incandescently articulate.
I see. And that is your culminating commentary on David Saleh, which I'll
add that he's also been a huge influence on me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about influence, of course, the big figure in your life is also John Baldessari in California.
One of. I'm pretty polymorphous in my influences.
Yes, yeah. Right.
Let me say wildly polymorphous in my influences.
Yeah. You know what I want to do? I want to, because of our timing, and this is so brief, we've only scratched the surface. Maybe we can do it again, who knows? But tell us a bit about your Flotsam series, which is the most recent and the one that I have found to be absolutely beautiful in so many ways and really mesmerizing. And almost everybody I show these to says the exact same thing. They kind of gasp. Tell us about where they come from. And so I'm interested also in some of your influences in these works.
Okay. Okay. There's
some of your interests in terms of.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to unpack here.
Yeah,
I
know. Begin with your discussion. You talked to me about.
Yeah, let's draw a big picture.
Yep.
If you go, we talked about the word looking like a group show. If you show any 2 decades of it together, or even a decade.
Sure.
But there's but then there's an overarching thread that, you know, the thinking behind it is actually quite consistent. But then there's actually 2 poles in the work. It goes from culturescape, which is loud and confrontational, meaning confrontational with the culture. It's trying to get to a point to make a point. Like a lot of my work in the 80s, like the self-portrait with logos,
right.
Really trying to make a clear point to lay it out. And then every now and then I react against that and drift into a poetic, which is using the mechanisms, the machinery and the tools that have been set up with this confrontational culturescape period, and then ricocheting into landscape, where I just long for sort of absolute silence in this deep sort of poetic space.
Right.
I call these sort of landscapes and seascapes at the end of history.
Okay.
Personally, I do not believe that I'm making art for 400-year canons. I don't believe that humanity has that kind of hold on our niche on this planet. I don't think we'll be around that long. So am I decorating the apocalypse? I don't know. People say, oh, it's about the environment. I say, I'm not an environmentalist. I have no interest in being an environmentalist. To be an environmentalist is to labor under the self-deluding notion that you're somehow saving the planet, which is just
that you're in charge.
You're not saving the planet. The planet will go on long beyond us. You know, it'll just eat us up and spit us out, shake us off like so many fleas.
We're not really in charge. That's
an environmentalist is laboring to maintain the niche that can support humanity as a species, and pretty much only that. So I've taken the side that I'm on the side of the planet. Yes, of course, I eat my vegan food and I drive hybrid cars, but I believe it's actually freaking hopeless.
I get
but I've taken the position that I'm on the side of the planet.
Right.
And I'm against humanity.
Okay.
But nevertheless, I'm a human. So here we have to play this game. So I'm back to landscapes, and I love landscape. It's quiet. I don't know. I'm deeply happy in this space, like being on the treadmill and listening to this science, deep about the granularity of protons into this weird sort of mystical sort of silence. So these landscapes, you'll notice on the right we have a simple earth-sky binary, which is an obsession for me. It's just space and matter.
Yep.
Stuff and non-stuff, blue and brown, and it was used quite a bit by the surrealists because it became the perfect sort of performative backdrop preceding the march for them to act out their surrealist sort of agenda.
Yep.
And I'm revisiting it. The other one is fire, well, because fire is out there. But what you'll see in these 2 paintings is the tidal lines. These lines actually represent the vestigial lines of the waves that washed up the rubbish onto the beach, the flotsam, the ocean-borne oceanic detritus that washed them up on the beach and left them there. So it's actually taken the pattern of waves. In these 2 paintings, I actually use the same wave pattern. One is backwards. I used an actual wave pattern that I photographed off the beach to lay out the garbage. The plastic well, garbage. I don't know. I think it's treasure. I kind of love this stuff. Well, when we get a new haul in, I'm like running down like it's Christmas to look through the garbage.
Right, right.
Find the really good stuff. And I
Yeah,
think it's
flip-flops, plastic bottles, and all sorts of things.
it's a mixture of stuff from the anthroposphere, human-made stuff. So I consider that like residuals of human narratives, bits of life lived, laid out. But it's also mixed with the organic compounds. So, and they've come from the, washed out through rivers and put into the great gyres of the oceans, whirling around for maybe a few decades before they're vomited back onto foreign shores, not, miles from whence they originally issued.
Right.
And so there's this great sort of molecular cosmic sort of dance going on. And the backdrops I'm painting in front of, in this case, fire and earth and sky, are on purpose, purposefully, utterly minimal, broken down to sort of like just, essential sort of elements.
Are they sublime in any way? What do you think of the tradition of the sublime?
Well, like I said, I don't think of them as like they're woeful paeans to the damaged earth. I do not think that way. I think they're beautiful. I think the garbage, in the great gyres of microplastics circulating in the Pacific, I think they're beautiful. I don't make a distinction between, human garbage and, from the anthroposphere with the biosphere. We are the biosphere. Human beings are part, our nature.
Yeah.
And, whatever we visit on the planet, whatever we live is part, is as much a part of the natural order as bonobo mating in, sub-Saharan forests and wildebeest, migrating across the Serengeti. It's just as much a part of, the natural order of things. Us making garbage. What we refer to now as the Anthropocene.
Right. I think the other thing that I think is so important for people to understand about your work, your process, your life is the importance of water to you, the ocean, surfing as a way of I think navigating that element, and how surfing itself, at one time you said it was a kind of embarrassment because surfers weren't considered very intellectual. And you've since openly embraced it and said this is partly where even the Susie boxes originated, in your love of water and the surfing and the culture of surfing. Before we go to questions from the audience, can you speak a few minutes about the importance of that to you?
Surfing specifically?
Surfing itself and the way it serves as a kind of metaphor for your creative.
Yeah, I once wrote an article for a now defunct magazine, shamefully defunct because it was a great magazine called Yard.
Okay.
And suddenly, you know how it is. You're a writer, and as a painter too. Every now and then, you just get these epiphanies, and you just nail something on a level that you don't normally nail it. I wrote this article. It just sort of came out of the blue, and it sort of just put so much together. And I spoke specific about that. I referred to it as Surfing World is my personal laboratory, the way that Gwambi was for Jane Goodall, where she, had her sort of private laboratory, if you will, full of the a very specific and very well known to her society of chimpanzees. I'm not likening surfers to chimpanzees, of course, but I am.
Shh, don't tell anybody.
Apologies to no apologies. But the surf world has sort of functioned in that way to me. It's sort of my own personal sort of Gwambi, my own sort of personal laboratory where I've got to see this sort of microcosm of culture. And that's where the logo pieces that I did that became well known in the 80s came from.
That was an epiphany to me. I had no idea of that. And I was astounded by that. Hi, Tess. She wants to invite in some questions, of course. Boy, the time flies. And Tess, what do you think? Do we have some good questions from people? Ashley, feel indulged.
Yes, we got a few questions lined up, and I'm sorry we kind of have to move this along a little bit to invite the audience in. We could listen to you both talk all day, but so that people have a chance to hear their questions.
Yes, of course.
So I wanted to start with a question from Mauricio Bortoletti, and it's for Ashley. It is, so Ashley, jumping from postmodernist art scene in New York City, as you've mentioned, to Bali, it looks like a big jump. What's the influence of living in Bali on your current work?
Great, key question.
Okay. Hi, Maurizio. It's a friend of mine.
Oh, lovely.
Really?
Okay, when I moved to Bali, I was very, very protective, defensive, concerned about being one of these, what I call these, wispy wankers who wanted to live this sort of Goganian, sort of escapist, nonsense idea about running away to some third world exotica and painting local folklorica with globules of pastel colors and all this other, tripe. So I made every effort that I could to not be influenced. I was living there because I chose to live there. Certain artists, when they escaped New York, they moved upstate, they moved to rural Pennsylvania. I was just moving a bit further, and I didn't want it to be more than that. Yes, so I could live in a place where I wore shorts and went surfing, but essentially just moving my studio a bit. I didn't want to follow those hackneyed kind of trails. So I'd made my studios always like, just a white cubic block that could have existed in Beijing, Dresden, Berlin, or Los Angeles. And that was very purposeful and very intentional. And it wasn't until I'd been there for 10 or 11 years that I looked at the paintings that I was doing in 2004 and went, holy crap. Bali is all over these damn things. The color had completely shifted. The palette was like now greeny, bluey, grayy, greeny, browny, grayy, green. Whereas before it had been like what I called non-colors, like black, white, silver and gold, and red, yellow, and blue. It had been very sort of industrial. Oh, and safety orange, always safety orange. So, and also the composition had in some way mimicked the Batuan school of painting, which if you know the Batuan school, it's, I'm gonna go to the top of my screen. Up to here is land, and above is space.
Right.
And down below is populated by millions and millions of like figures all twirling. And it's always greeny, bluey, greeny, grayy, browny, greeny, grayy, yeah. And so a little sliver of sky up the top and all this swirling stuff. And I was doing exactly that, but in a completely different way. And I went like, whoa, Bali has actually entered into the paintings, but not through any conscious effort. My efforts were all to stop it. And it's crept under the doors, through the cracks in the windows, through the vents and through the air conditioning system. And now I'm drunk on it. I'm engulfed in it. And I couldn't do anything about it. But I felt good about that because I came about it in a way that was organic.
Right.
Or it came to me in an organic way.
Okay, so a follow-up also from Mauricio is, it's interesting that you consider the garbage in the sea as beautiful and inspirational for you. I think it is very much connected with a poetic of the big city like New York, for example. And this looks connected with the cultural climate of the 80s. Would you agree with that?
No.
No.
No, because New York, its primary issue for that garbage, and it was always skanky and dirty and diseased. See, the garbage, when I get it, it's been washed 1,000 times by 1 billion molecules. It's circulated through so many, organic, natural molecular cycles that it becomes almost something else. In New York, it's the point of issue. Everything's disgusting. Everything's dirty. Everything's, loaded with pathogens. And maybe if we frame the question, Mauricio is correct. I have to think about this one.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's a good point. Yeah. Okay, but I'm going to leave it at that. Not in a direct way. No. I see it as completely different. Okay, if there is a connection, it's the, let's go to the logos for a second. The logos represent kind of things that are part of culturescapes, and I've dealt with what I call landscape and culturescape throughout my career. And so the garbage mixing with the natural landscapes and the sort of undulating lines of the waves becomes culturescape and landscape. Yeah, so in that sense, Mauricio is correct.
Okay. We'll go on to another question. This is from Nicole Soriano. Ashley, the tension of not quite fitting is definitely felt in The Blue Man, although you say he's not a self-portrait. You mentioned in a recent interview that you will always remain an outsider in Indonesia despite your best efforts. I think that was in a very recent interview, but also mentioned how you've long felt you belonged there. How has this insider-outsider perspective in Bali evolved over the years? And do you feel closer? Do you feel you are closer now to where you want to be than you were 30 years ago?
Oh God, that last part. How do you even begin to unpack that? Do I feel closer? Oh God. Okay. What's the first part of the question again? That was interesting.
The question is, how has the insider-outsider perspective in Bali evolved over the years?
Yeah. Okay. We got to go back quite a few years here to childhood. I grew up. I was born in the Caribbean. And because of my father's work as an anthropological linguist, we ended up moving a lot in a lot of different countries. So I lived always never longer than 2 years in one place, except for Guyana, South America, where we lived for 4 years. And everywhere else was like 2 years. So there was never an ability to make friends or to dig too deep. And then there was also, because my father was a leftist, we always got put in local schools. He didn't want us to go into those horrible expatriate schools where we'd only mix with sort of other foreign children. So I went to local schools, whether I was in West Africa, the Caribbean, South America, I was always in local schools. So it gives me a very interesting perspective. And then again, when we moved to America, I moved to Hawaii, not Kansas, not Missouri. So it gives, a very interesting perspective, culturally, racially, about self. And then and now I've chosen to live sort of outside of whatever culture I might belong to, which obviously I have parents who have a particular genetic legacy, have a particular cultural legacy. And so obviously, that's handed down. So I carry that with me. And, but yeah, so there's the outsider position is always built in to whatever views, to whatever take, understanding, of crunching the world around me. It's just part of it. Is it even outsider? It's just not from a set. It's not from a set entrenched understanding. It never will. It can't be.
Almost talking about a very fluid identity in a way, one that adapts. And from the very beginning, you had to adapt a lot to your settings. Yeah,
he heard them.
Okay, we'll wrap up with one last question because we're slightly over time. Sorry about that to our attendees. And this last question is actually for both Gregory and Ashley. So as two diasporic individuals, if you both identify with the term in Bali and Bangkok, what similarities in experience have you found in common?
Between the two of us?
Between the two of you, yeah. Or maybe talk about your experiences individually and we can draw the parallels.
If you said I should go first?
Yeah.
I think that in some ways, because we've both been here for some time, he's certainly been in Asia longer than I have. I've been here since 2010, so it's only a decade. And a decade to a historian, I'm a historian, a decade is nothing. I'm kind of just getting my feet wet in a way. But I really relate to a lot of the things he talks about in terms of both fitting in and not fitting in. I think that's a very natural feeling. But also a lot of people, I know a lot of Asians who've been overseas and they've come back and they say they don't feel like they fit in anywhere anymore. And I feel kind of the same. But I think there's a lot of beauty and perspective to be had from that. So it can be lonely at times, but it's also extremely enriching in many ways. I think we would all say. So I also feel that when I go home to the States to visit New York, my God, I don't fit in any sense in the way I did for 30 years there. And that's, so it's very strange in some ways, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. Ashley, I don't know how you feel overall about that, but.
I forgot the question.
Oh, I think they were asking us in some ways, like, how do we relate to each other in terms of our experience in Asia?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, two expats, so to speak.
Well, I have to give Gregory credit here because it's only very recently, and two writers only, Gregory and a young Indonesian writer named Adi Hong Tan, are the only two who suddenly like looked at my work now from the perspective of this place. It's usually been the usual boring cliche, you know, Ashley Bickerton was part of the Neo Geo movement with Jeff Koons and Peter Halley and blah, blah, the East Village, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But both Gregory and Adi Hong Tan have re-looked at it after, you know, with substantial evidence to draw on, you know, to what's actually going on here, and seen it, broken this sort of you know, ethnocultural stereotype of, you know, like he is this, he is that, this is this, this is that, and sort of seen it sort of in a more organic, you know, way how things actually fit into things, and you know, and posited me in the my work in the Southeast Asian firmament, you know, and you know, evolution of ideas, and for this I'm really, really grateful, because I got very, very tired of sort of, in fact, that's one of the reasons I actually moved to Asia. I got very bored of the pigeonholing of lazy criticism.
Right.
Just places you, you know, easily in things that we all consensus on, like.
If I may say, in passing here, you were brought up in many different places. So I think you developed a fluid sense of identity based on that. I was brought up with very little sense of ethnic identity. Of course, there's some national identity or American, whatever, but I didn't travel as much. But I did grow up with nothing other than this notion that I was supposed to make something of myself. And so I think that maybe our ability to go to a different place in the world and make a life there is based partly on that fluid sense of who we are and our ability to morph a bit or to explore things in ways.
In Adi Hong Tan's article, who I just mentioned, he referred to me, and I will include you there too, Gregory, as refugees, which have a certain type of name and actually a certain type of status in we are sort of inverse, sort of Namjoon Pikes, Onkawaras, Kusumas, you know, people are Asian artists who set up in the East. I mean, why not a two-way flow? Some the artists I just mentioned are some of my favorite artists. You know, Asian artists who set up in America.
I don't know if you would agree with this, but I have tremendous trouble with the word expat. I don't know what the heck it means, and I'm not sure why. But if someone says, "Oh, you're an expat," I just have immense problems with that, and I don't know why. It's based so much on the notion that you're one thing that is somehow apart now, and yet you're always that thing, but in a different place. It just bugs the heck out of me. But there's my confession for the day.
Also very different from immigrant or migrant worker,
sure,
foreign worker, which are terms that are usually attributed to other immigrants of other ethnicities.
Sure. Migrant cultural worker? Is that a thing?
It should be. It probably is. Maybe at that point, the cultural elevation makes them expats.
Should it be?
All right. Well, unfortunately, we've got to end things there, but I'd like to thank you both very much for being here and all of our attendees for joining us and your delightful questions. There are a few more questions that we didn't get to, but I will save them and we'll get back to you privately.
Yeah.
For anybody else who's joining our conversation now who doesn't know about the exhibition, we will be posting the link to the online exhibition on our Instagram, it's on our Facebook, or we can email it to you directly. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us. And
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Gajah. Tess,
thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Gregory. Thank you, everyone in Singapore.
That was so much fun.
It was really fun.
Thank you. Thank you to
Yeah.
everyone for coming. That's wonderful to have everybody here.
We'll definitely do more of these.
Yeah. Maybe toward the end of the show, we'll even do chat some more. We'll see.
Yeah,
Okay.
we could break it up
Yeah,
over a
everyone.
series.
Ashley, take care. We'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks,
Well,
guys.
thanks, guys. Appreciate
Thank you,
everything.
Gregory.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Gajah Gallery, for being,
Absolutely.
you know, the stuff.
Exactly. That's perfect. Great. Great. The show looks great. Congratulations, Ashley.
Thank you.
And Gajah. Bye.
Bye.